The courtroom was packed, but it felt like I was the only one standing still. All I could hear was my heartbeat until her voice cut through the air like glass shattering on tile. "She's a gold digger. She only married him for money." Talia's voice echoed, sharp and smug, her words aimed directly at me. I didn't flinch. I didn't even look at her. I kept my eyes on the judge, even as my ex-husband's lawyer leaned forward, nodding like what she said confirmed everything. He didn't say it out loud, but his agreement was obvious in the way he smirked. Like the whole courtroom should know by now that I was the villain in this story. Logan didn't say anything either. He just sat next to her, adjusting his designer watch, calm as ever. That silence hit harder than her words. He used to defend me. He used to love me. Now he was letting his new wife destroy me in front of our daughter. I stayed quiet. Not because I didn't have anything to say, but because I knew if I opened my mouth, I might not be able to control what came out. I was tired. Tired of defending myself. Tired of being called things I wasn't. Tired of fighting a man I once built a life with. I felt Nova's small hand wrap around mine. Her fingers were warm, a little sweaty. She leaned into my side, close enough that I could feel her heartbeat through her dress. Then, clear and steady, she spoke. "Mom, should I tell them what we found in Daddy's phone?" The room froze. Even the judge blinked. My heart dropped into my stomach. I turned slowly and looked at Nova. Her big brown eyes were serious, unshaken, like she understood exactly what she was saying. She didn't look at anyone else, just me, waiting for permission. I didn't know what to say. For a second, I thought about pretending I hadn't heard her. I thought about brushing it off, protecting her from the mess we were drowning in, but she wasn't afraid. She was asking me if it was time to tell the truth. And it was. I nodded. That one nod made the courtroom shift. I saw Logan's jaw tighten, Talia's hands drop to her lap, and Mr. Brennan Chase, Logan's lawyer, so confident a moment ago, slowly sat back down in his chair without saying a single word. No one said anything. Not a single person tried to stop her. And that was the moment I realized the story they had tried to write about me was already falling apart. Not because I yelled, not because I fought dirty, but because the one person they thought was too small to matter, the one person they underestimated, had been paying attention the whole time. My daughter. My daughter was about to expose the truth that would burn every lie they built into ash, and she didn't even flinch. My name is Sienna Cruz, and before all this, I believed in the kind of love that survives anything. I thought I had it. I thought Logan and I were building something that could weather bad luck, hard times, even disappointment. We met when we were both broke and hungry for something more. He was a sharp-talking tech guy with a dream and barely $1 to his name. I was 22, studying part-time, waitressing at night, living in a one-bedroom apartment with my sister. Logan had ideas, big ones. He talked about apps, automation, the future of retail, things I barely understood. But he made me believe, not just in his vision, but in him. I fell hard. He proposed after a year with a plastic ring he'd won at an arcade. We laughed about it over burgers and fries, and I said yes without hesitation. For the first few years, we were inseparable. I paid the rent, bought the groceries, and covered his half of the bills. He stayed up late coding and pitching to investors. Every rejection was brutal, but we kept going. When we found out I was pregnant, we both cried. I remember him holding my hand and saying, "Nova will grow up seeing what love built." He named her Nova, after the stars. He said she was our beginning and our light. For a while, she really was. Logan got his break a few months after she was born. A small investment, a client referral, and then everything changed fast. He got office space. He hired a team. Money started coming in. Not millions at first, but enough to finally breathe. Then more. A lot more. Logan became someone people wanted to be around. He wore tailored suits, bought a Tesla, started hanging out with people who wore designer sunglasses indoors. He changed his phone password. He stopped coming home for dinner. I made excuses to Nova, saying he was working late, but even she stopped asking after a while. The day I found the receipt for a diamond necklace I'd never seen, I didn't cry. I just folded it into my drawer and sat down next to my daughter. Logan filed for divorce 4 months later. No affair, at least not one he admitted to. Just a conversation over coffee where he said we'd grown apart and that I deserved someone who could give me the attention he no longer could. He promised to be there for Nova, and he was, for a while. But then came Talia. Talia was everything I wasn't. Younger, polished, never caught without perfect nails and a camera-ready smile. She moved into his penthouse like she'd always belonged there. Logan married her a year after our divorce was finalized. That was when things really started to shift. The gifts for Nova stopped. The weekend visits became irregular. He began accusing me of turning her against him, saying I was manipulative and unstable. Then I got the papers. He and Talia were seeking full custody. The claim was that I was emotionally volatile and financially dependent, that I had married Logan to use him for his money, and now that the marriage was over, I was trying to cling to his wealth through our daughter. It was laughable. Except it wasn't, because they had money, lawyers, and a story that fit their polished image. I didn't have the money to hire someone big. I had Valerie Rhodes, a kind-hearted but overworked attorney who took on family cases because she believed in helping women like me. She told me to stay calm, to keep my answers clear, and to not let them get under my skin. I nodded, even though inside I was already unraveling. I had nothing but the truth. No savings, no PR team, no skeletons in anyone's closet to drag out in return. Just the truth, and a little girl who still believed that her mom was someone worth fighting for. Nova didn't know everything. I tried to keep her protected from the worst of it, but kids see more than we think. She heard the whispers. She saw the silences. She noticed when her father started forgetting birthdays and school plays. She noticed when his eyes looked past her to Talia like she was an accessory, not his child. The day before the hearing, I packed her lunch like I always did. She hugged me and said, "It's okay, Mom. You don't need to win with words. Just let them talk. They show who they are." I laughed, but my throat tightened. She was 7, and she understood the world better than most adults I knew. That morning, walking into the courthouse, I wasn't ready for war. I just wanted my daughter to be safe, to stay with the one person who had never used her as a bargaining chip. I didn't know she would end up being the one to defend me when it mattered most. The courtroom was cold, not just the temperature, but the atmosphere. Even the wood panels on the walls felt sterile. I sat at the plaintiff's table, Nova by my side, coloring quietly, her backpack propped against the chair leg. She didn't know all the details, but she could sense the energy in the room. Tension has a way of clinging to children. It doesn't matter how much you try to shield them. Across from me sat Logan, buttoned into a charcoal gray suit, fingers tapping against his knee like he had somewhere more important to be. Talia sat next to him, legs crossed, heels tapping the floor with precision. She looked perfect. Hair smooth, makeup flawless, dress subtle but expensive. She leaned over and whispered something in Logan's ear, then gave me a look that was all polished contempt. It said, "You don't belong here. You're just a mistake he made on the way up." The bailiff called the room to order. The judge entered, and suddenly it all became real. This wasn't some hypothetical argument. This was my daughter's life being put on display for a stranger to dissect. One wrong answer, one misplaced word, and I could lose her. Logan's attorney, Brennan Chase, stood up with the ease of someone used to being listened to. He had the voice of a late-night radio host and the confidence of someone who had never been told no. He started with pleasantries, painting Logan as a responsible, successful father who wanted what was best for his daughter. Then came the pivot. "Your Honor, we must address the central concern," he said, stepping into the center of the courtroom. "Ms. Cruz married my client at a time when he had very limited resources. After Mr. Cruz's company became profitable, her financial dependence increased. There is a clear pattern of opportunism here. Ms. Cruz is not independently stable and has shown repeated signs of using her connection to my client to maintain a lifestyle she did not earn." My throat tightened, but I stayed quiet. Valerie, my lawyer, placed a calming hand on my arm. Then Talia stood up, unprompted. "Your Honor, I think we need to stop pretending she's something she's not," she said, her voice confident and rehearsed. "Sienna used Logan. She's using Nova now. She was never in it for love. She was in it for the money. Everyone knows it." The courtroom stirred. Even the judge looked annoyed by her outburst but allowed her to continue. Brennan nodded slightly as if this had all been part of the strategy. Talia kept going, spinning this version of me that sounded so far from the truth I almost laughed. She said I never supported Logan, that I clung to him when his business took off, and that I've been manipulating Nova to stay relevant. The judge turned to Valerie, asking if we had a response. Valerie began to speak, but I could tell her strategy was to remain calm, factual, and unshaken. I respected her for that. But in that moment, all I could think was how unfair it all felt. I had worked night shifts while Logan slept off his failures. I had balanced our checkbook while he gambled everything on another failed pitch. I had fed our daughter from coupons while he drove across the state chasing investors. But now, none of that mattered. Now I was being reduced to a stereotype, a woman who clung to a man, who saw her child as leverage. I looked at Nova. She had stopped coloring. She was watching them, watching her father say nothing while his wife tried to erase her mother's worth in front of strangers. That was the moment I felt something shift. I didn't cry. I didn't shout. But something inside me hardened. This wasn't just about me anymore. This was about what Nova would remember, what she would take with her into the rest of her life. She was watching me. She was watching all of us. I squeezed her hand, and then she said it. "Mom, should I tell them what we found in Daddy's phone?" Every head turned. Even the judge froze for a moment. Brennan slowly lowered the document he'd been holding. Logan shifted in his chair. Talia's jaw clenched. Nova looked straight ahead, calm, her voice steady. "I remember where you saved the screenshots, if you need them," she added. For the first time all day, the room was silent, and I realized that no matter how much they tried to control the story, they had underestimated the one person who knew them both too well. The moment Nova spoke, the room stopped breathing. I could feel it. The judge didn't move. Talia sat frozen, her expression stuck between confusion and panic. Brennan Chase, who had been mid-sentence, stood awkwardly silent, papers still in his hand. Logan turned toward Nova with an expression I hadn't seen in years, pure fear. I looked at my daughter. Her voice had been clear, not loud, but somehow stronger than anything said all day. I didn't even know she had seen those messages. I had read them late at night, alone, unsure of what to do with them. I thought she had been asleep. She must have looked through my email while I was getting ready for work. At the time, I had been too overwhelmed to think clearly about what they meant or how to use them. But Nova had been thinking. The judge leaned forward. "What exactly are you referring to, young lady?" Nova glanced at me again. I gave her the tiniest nod, not because I wanted to make her speak, but because I trusted her. She nodded back, like we were two people in full agreement. Then she looked back at the judge. "Daddy let me use his iPad when I was staying with him and Talia. He forgot it was connected to his phone. There were messages between him and Talia about how they were going to make my mom look bad so they could take me away. I didn't understand it all, but I took pictures and sent them to Mom's email." The judge blinked, visibly processing what she had just said. Valerie stood slowly and addressed the court. "Your Honor, if I may, we do have an email containing screenshots of the conversations Nova is referring to. They were forwarded to Ms. Cruz's personal account. I have them printed and time-stamped, ready for review." She reached into her file and pulled out the documents. Courtroom deputy took them to the bench. As the judge began reading, I kept my eyes on Logan. His face was tight, like he was holding his breath. Talia looked like she was trying not to scream. The judge read for a long minute, then another. The silence was heavy. You could hear a pin drop. He finally looked up and spoke directly to Logan and Talia. "These messages show clear intent to fabricate evidence and manipulate custody proceedings. I see references to hiring someone to gather false information on Ms. Cruz. There's also mention of staging emotional incidents to portray her as unstable." Logan looked down. Talia shifted in her seat and finally broke the silence. "This is taken out of context. We were just frustrated. None of that actually happened." But the judge held up a hand. "Ms. Cruz, did you have any prior knowledge of these plans?" I answered truthfully. Number I found the messages in my email a few days ago. I didn't know Nova had seen them. I didn't even know what to do with them until today. Valerie nodded beside me, her voice firm. We were prepared to respond to the allegations with character witnesses and financial records. But given this evidence, The intent of the opposing party to mislead the court speaks for itself. Brennan Chase didn't say a word. His arms were crossed now, his jaw tight. Logan still hadn't spoken. The judge took a moment, then leaned back in his chair. This changes the direction of today's hearing significantly. At this time, I'm placing a hold on any change to the custody agreement. Furthermore, I am ordering a formal review of these communications. If it's confirmed that there was an attempt to manipulate the court, there will be consequences. I looked down at Nova, who was now quietly coloring again, like nothing had happened. Her shoulders were relaxed. She had done what she came to do. I reached for her hand and squeezed it. She squeezed back. The entire day had been building toward their version of the truth, their polished story, their performance. But they hadn't counted on Nova. They hadn't counted on the child they tried to turn into a weapon, choosing to speak for herself instead. I hadn't expected it either. But in that moment, I knew something had shifted, not just in the courtroom, but in me. I was no longer sitting in silence to survive. I was standing in truth to protect something more important than my pride, my daughter's future. For a few moments, no one moved. The judge had just called for an immediate review of the messages. Logan didn't object, neither did Brennan. Talia's expression had changed from irritation to something closer to disbelief, like she couldn't believe this was happening. She kept glancing at the judge as if hoping he'd say it was all a misunderstanding, but it wasn't. I stayed quiet, holding Nova's hand in mine. I wanted to say something to her, to tell her how proud I was, but I knew this wasn't over yet. I had to stay focused. I had to stay grounded. The judge cleared his throat and looked directly at Logan. "Mr. Cruz, I'm giving you the opportunity to speak now. Do you deny the contents of these messages?" Logan looked up, and for the first time all day he didn't have his usual confidence. He glanced toward Brennan, but Brennan kept his eyes forward. Logan shifted in his chair and finally answered, "I don't deny them, Your Honor. But I didn't mean for any of it to get that far. It was just venting between my wife and me. Frustrations." The judge raised an eyebrow. Frustration doesn't justify fabricating accusations or attempting to manipulate the court. You discussed creating false narratives about Ms. Cruz's mental health. You referenced using private investigators to dig up material to discredit her. That is not frustration. That is intent. Logan opened his mouth, then closed it again. Talia broke the silence. "This is ridiculous. You're seriously going to listen to a 7-year-old and a few screenshots?" The judge turned to her with sharp clarity. "What I'm listening to, Ms. Cruz, is the content of your own words. Words that show premeditated actions to undermine a mother's credibility in order to gain full custody of a child. That is a serious matter." Talia sat back, crossed her arms, and didn't say another word. Brennan Chase finally stood. "Your Honor, given the unexpected nature of this evidence, I respectfully request a recess before continuing with further testimony." The judge shook his head. "No, Mr. Chase. This hearing is no longer proceeding as planned. I am ordering a full review of all communications related to this custody case. Until that investigation is complete, the current custody arrangement will remain in place, with Ms. Cruz as the primary custodial parent. Furthermore, Mr. Cruz and Ms. Talia Cruz are to have only supervised visitation with Nova until the investigation is concluded." I heard Talia let out a quiet gasp. Logan didn't even flinch. I wasn't sure if it was acceptance or shock, but he just nodded once and looked down at the table. The arrogance had drained from him completely. Brennan sat down beside him and rubbed his forehead, his earlier confidence gone. I took a slow breath, not because I wanted to celebrate, but because the weight I'd been carrying for years had shifted. It wasn't gone, but it had finally been seen. The truth had landed. The judge turned back to me. "Ms. Cruz, do you have anything you'd like to say before I close today's hearing?" I looked at Nova, who had started coloring again, her feet swinging gently beneath the bench. Then I looked at the judge. "I just want what's best for my daughter. I don't need revenge. I just want her to feel safe and loved. That's all I've ever wanted." The judge nodded. I believed that. And then it was over. The gavel came down. People began gathering their papers, whispering to one another, eyes still flicking between us. Talia stormed out of the courtroom, not waiting for Logan. Brennan followed a few steps behind, already pulling out his phone. Logan sat for another few seconds before standing and walking toward the door without a word. Nova leaned into me and whispered, "Can we get ice cream now?" I smiled for the first time all day. "Yes, baby, as much as you want." As we walked out of the courtroom, hand in hand, I noticed something had changed, not just the outcome, but the way I carried myself. For years, I had been shrinking to survive, staying small to avoid provoking anyone. Today, I didn't shrink. I didn't scream either. I let the truth do the talking, and the truth, once spoken, didn't ask for permission. The next morning, Nova woke up in my bed with her arms wrapped around my waist and her head resting on my chest. She looked peaceful, safe. I let her sleep in a little longer before getting up to make breakfast. She had earned it. I stood in the kitchen, staring at the sunlight stretching across the counter, trying to let it sink in that the worst of it was over. For months, I had lived with the fear of losing her. Every email, every notice, every accusation felt like a countdown to something I couldn't stop. I had spent so long preparing for the worst that I didn't know how to feel now that we were finally safe. The investigation into Logan and Talia's actions moved forward quickly after the hearing. The screenshots Nova had captured were verified, and more evidence surfaced. Their communications showed a clear strategy to discredit me, not because I had done anything wrong, but because I had become inconvenient. They didn't want shared custody. They wanted control. They wanted Nova as a trophy in a battle they created. Supervised visitation was enforced, and Logan didn't contest it. Talia, from what I heard, moved out not long after. Maybe the pressure was too much. Maybe the truth had ruined the illusion they had built around themselves. Either way, I stopped hearing from her. Nova asked about her dad a few times. I answered honestly but gently. I told her that her father was still her father, and that people sometimes make choices that hurt others, even when they don't realize how badly. I didn't poison her against him. I didn't need to. Children see what adults try to hide. She had already made her own conclusions. Over the next few months, something shifted in our home. The tension lifted. The fear stopped living in my chest. I could breathe again. I picked up extra shifts without worrying someone would accuse me of neglect. I went to bed without wondering what surprise legal notice might show up in the morning. I smiled more. So did Nova. One afternoon, she came home from school with a drawing. It was us, holding hands, standing under a bright yellow sun. Her teacher had written a note on the back that said, "Nova told me this is a picture of you two finally being free." That note stayed on the fridge for months. I've learned a lot through all of this. I learned that silence isn't weakness, that not every battle is won with shouting. Sometimes it's about standing still while the lies crash down around you. Sometimes it's about trusting that the truth, even if it takes time, will speak louder than the performance others put on. I used to think that being strong meant keeping everything inside. Now I know better. Strength is not pretending everything is fine. Strength is showing up anyway. It's putting one foot in front of the other, even when your legs are shaking. It's raising a daughter in the middle of chaos, and somehow giving her the courage to speak the truth when it matters most. People still ask me how I stayed calm in that courtroom, how I didn't scream when they called me names or tried to erase everything I had done for my family. The truth is, I wasn't calm. I was scared. I was angry. I was exhausted. But I looked at my daughter and I knew I couldn't give them what they wanted. They wanted me to break so they could prove I was unfit. So I didn't break. I bent, I breathed, I held her hand, and she did what no one expected. She told the truth. Now, I help other women facing similar custody battles. I volunteer with a legal advocacy group that supports mothers who are being silenced or painted as villains because they dared to leave, dared to speak up, or dared to protect their children. I tell them what Nova taught me. The truth doesn't always come with applause. Sometimes it walks into a courtroom in the voice of a child and changes everything. Sometimes the strongest thing you can do is raise someone brave enough to speak when you can't. If this story resonated with you, or if you've ever been in a situation where the truth felt too quiet to matter, I hope you remember this. Your silence does not mean you are wrong. And sometimes The most powerful voices come from the people we least expect. Thank you for watching and being part of this journey. If you felt something, if this story moved you, please like the video, share it with someone who needs to hear it, and leave a comment below. I'd love to hear your thoughts or your own story. And if you're new here, subscribe to the channel for more real, raw, and powerful stories like this one. Your support helps bring these voices to life. Take care of yourself and take care of each other.